Millions of people have accepted that narrative. Millions of people have been told to make peace with a disease that quietly eats away at their organs, their eyesight, their circulation, their quality of life, year after year after year. That assumption is now being challenged by peer-reviewed research. And the compound at the center of that challenge is not a pharmaceutical. It's a seed. Hi, I'm Dr. Leana. I'm an emergency medicine physician and metabolism researcher. And after spending nearly 15 years watching patients cycle through medications that manage symptoms without ever addressing root cause, I started digging into the clinical literature on something most endocrinologists have never mentioned to their patients. What I found changed the way I think about type 2 diabetes entirely. And it changed the way I counsel patients who sit across from me convinced that their diagnosis is permanent. In this video, the exact seed that clinical trials have shown can reduce fasting blood glucose by nearly 19 milligrams per deciliter in just 12 weeks is going to be revealed. The precise biological mechanisms that make it work at the cellular level will be broken down. And the exact protocol, the amount, the timing, the preparation method that the research supports will be walked through step by step. Every person watching this will leave with a concrete, evidence-backed action plan that could be started tomorrow morning. But first, it's important to understand why conventional approaches keep failing millions of people. Most people with type 2 diabetes have been told the same thing. Eat less sugar, exercise more, take your medication, and eventually you'll need insulin injections. It's a progressive disease, they're told. It only gets worse over time. Your job is to manage it. And for most people, that advice feels like a life sentence handed down by someone who spent 7 minutes reading their chart. But after nearly 15 years practicing emergency medicine and studying metabolic disorders, something has been observed that completely contradicts that simplistic advice. Patients who were told their condition was permanent have shown dramatic improvements, not through more aggressive medication, but through specific dietary interventions that target the actual root mechanisms driving their insulin resistance. These aren't anecdotal stories. These are measurable, reproducible, clinically documented outcomes. Here's what most people never hear from their doctor. Type 2 diabetes is not primarily a blood sugar disease. It is a fat storage disease. It is a cellular signaling disease. And most critically, it is a pancreatic inflammation disease. The elevated blood sugar that gets measured at the doctor's office is a downstream symptom, not the cause. It's the smoke alarm, not the fire. And yet, the entire conventional treatment model is built around silencing that alarm, rather than putting out the fire. Think of the pancreas like a factory. Specifically, think of the beta cells as workers on an assembly line, whose job is to package and ship insulin every time glucose enters the bloodstream. In a healthy person, that assembly line runs smoothly. Glucose comes in, insulin goes out, cells absorb the energy, and blood sugar returns to normal. But in type 2 diabetes, something has gone terribly wrong inside that factory. The workers are still there, at least the ones that haven't been destroyed yet. But the factory floor is flooded, not with water, but with fat, visceral fat. Ectopic fat deposits that have infiltrated the pancreas itself and are literally suffocating the beta cells. Those fat deposits trigger chronic low-grade inflammation through NF-kappa B pathway activation, which further damages beta cell function and accelerates their destruction. It's a vicious cycle. The inflammation damages the cells. The damaged cells produce less insulin. The reduced insulin causes more fat storage. The additional fat triggers more inflammation. Round and round it goes. And every rotation, the damage gets worse. That is the real disease. And no amount of carb counting addresses it. This is why conventional dietary advice fails so many people. It treats the symptom, blood sugar levels, without addressing the inflammatory cascade destroying pancreatic function from the inside. It's like telling someone with a house fire to open the windows because the smoke detector is too loud. The alarm stops, but the house is still burning. And here's the uncomfortable truth that doesn't get discussed enough outside of metabolic research circles. The medications most commonly prescribed for type 2 diabetes do exactly the same thing. They lower blood sugar numbers on a lab report. They make the chart look better. But many of them do nothing to halt the inflammatory destruction of beta cells. Some evidence suggests certain classes of medication may even accelerate beta cell burnout over time by forcing already damaged cells to produce more insulin than they can sustain. The factory workers aren't just exhausted. They're being forced to work overtime in a building that's on fire. So if the standard approach isn't fixing the underlying problem, what does? And the one seed at the center of the most promising clinical research, the one most Westerners walk right past in the grocery store without a second glance, is fenugreek. Fenugreek, Trigonella funum graecum, a small amber-colored seed that has been used in traditional medicine across India, the Middle East, and North Africa for over 3,000 years. And before the skepticism kicks in, before anyone dismisses this as folk medicine or wellness industry hype, consider this. India, where fenugreek consumption is part of daily culinary practice in hundreds of millions of households, has been the subject of some of the most rigorous clinical diabetes research on the planet. Researchers there have had access to populations who consume the seed daily and populations who don't, creating natural, controlled comparison groups that would be nearly impossible to replicate in a Western clinical trial. And what the data shows is remarkable. Not mildly interesting, not worth a footnote, remarkable. Japan gets the attention for longevity. The Mediterranean gets the credit for heart health. But when it comes to metabolic research on plant-based compounds that directly target insulin resistance mechanisms, the clinical work coming out of Indian research institutions on fenugreek is some of the most compelling metabolic science published in the last 2 decades. And yet most Western physicians have never read a single one of these studies. Most have never even heard of 4-hydroxyisoleucine, the compound that makes fenugreek unlike anything else in the plant kingdom. This seed does something extraordinary at the cellular level. It doesn't just lower blood sugar the way a medication does by forcing a temporary chemical change. It appears to actually repair and restore the biological machinery that regulates glucose metabolism. And it does it through not 1, not 2, but 4 distinct biochemical pathways that have been documented in peer-reviewed research. The first pathway is 4-hydroxyisoleucine and direct insulin sensitization. Fenugreek seeds contain a rare amino acid called 4-hydroxyisoleucine that exists in virtually no other food source in meaningful concentrations. This compound has a remarkable property. It stimulates insulin secretion from pancreatic beta cells, but only in the presence of elevated glucose. This is critical. Unlike sulfonylurea drugs that force beta cells to produce insulin regardless of blood sugar levels, potentially burning them out faster, 4-hydroxyisoleucine works like a smart switch. It enhances insulin release when it's needed and stays quiet when it's not. It protects the very cells it's stimulating. That distinction alone should make every endocrinologist in the world pay attention. Think of it like the difference between a thermostat and a furnace with a broken off switch. Sulfonylureas are the broken furnace. They blast heat regardless of the room temperature. 4-hydroxyisoleucine is the thermostat. It reads the room and responds proportionally. It works with the body's natural feedback loops instead of overriding them. Researchers at the National Institute of Nutrition in Hyderabad, India, studied 69 adults with newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes over a period of 12 weeks. Participants received 10 grams of fenugreek seed powder daily, soaked overnight and consumed on an empty stomach each morning. Using standard fasting glucose measurements and oral glucose tolerance testing, the study found a mean reduction of 18.9 milligrams per deciliter in fasting blood glucose compared to the control group, along with significant improvements in post-meal glucose clearance. That's not marginal, that's clinically meaningful. That's the kind of reduction that moves people from diabetic range back toward pre-diabetic or normal thresholds. And it happened with a tablespoon of seeds that cost less than a cup of coffee. The second pathway is galactomannan fiber and glucose absorption modulation. Fenugreek seeds are extraordinarily rich in a specific type of soluble fiber called galactomannan, which constitutes nearly 50% of the seed's dry weight. When consumed, galactomannan forms a viscous gel matrix in the stomach and small intestine that physically slows the rate at which glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream. Think of it like this. Imagine glucose absorption as water flowing through a pipe. In a normal meal, without fiber modulation, that pipe is wide open. Glucose floods in, blood sugar spikes, the pancreas scrambles to produce enough insulin to deal with the surge, and the entire system gets overwhelmed. Galactomannan essentially narrows that pipe. It doesn't block glucose, it meters it. It creates a slow, steady trickle instead of a flood, giving the pancreas time to respond proportionally rather than desperately. Instead of a tidal wave hitting a crumbling wall, it becomes a gentle stream that the system can handle without damage. A meta-analysis published by researchers at the University of Toronto, covering 10 randomized controlled trials involving a combined total of over 500 participants with type 2 diabetes, found that fenugreek supplementation consistently reduced fasting blood glucose levels, with an average reduction ranging from 15 to 20%. Hemoglobin A1C levels, which measure long-term blood sugar control over a 3-month window, also showed statistically significant improvement across multiple studies, confirming that the effect wasn't just acute, but sustained. This wasn't a flash in the pan. This was measurable, lasting metabolic change documented across multiple independent research teams in multiple countries. The third pathway is AMPK activation and cellular glucose uptake. Here's where it gets truly fascinating at the molecular level. Fenugreek compounds, particularly diasgenin, a steroidal saponin found in high concentration in the seeds, have been shown to activate AMP-activated protein kinase, commonly known as AMPK. This enzyme is sometimes called the body's master metabolic switch. And when it's turned on, remarkable things happen at the cellular level. When AMPK is activated, it tells muscle cells to open their glucose channels without needing insulin to unlock the door first. Imagine cells normally requiring a key, insulin, to let glucose inside. AMPK activation creates an emergency side door that glucose can pass through directly. This is the exact same pathway that metformin, the most widely prescribed diabetes drug in the world, targets. Fenugreek's diasgenin activates the same molecular switch through a different upstream mechanism. The same switch, a different hand turning it. One costs thousands of dollars a year in prescriptions and comes with a list of side effects. The other costs pennies and sits in the spice aisle. Researchers at the 4th Military Medical University in Xi'an, China, conducted a study involving 46 participants with metabolic syndrome over a period of 16 weeks using HOMA-IR scoring, the gold standard measurement for insulin resistance, and found that participants consuming fenugreek extract showed a 28% improvement in insulin sensitivity scores compared to baseline measurements, confirmed through laboratory assays of fasting insulin and glucose levels. The implications of this are significant. A seed that costs pennies per serving is activating the same cellular pathway as a pharmaceutical that generates billions in annual revenue. And the body doesn't know the difference. The cell doesn't care whether the signal came from a prescription or a seed. The door opens either way. The fourth pathway is NF-kappa B inhibition and pancreatic inflammation reduction. Remember the factory metaphor from earlier? The pancreatic beta cells drowning in inflammatory signals? This is where fenugreek addresses the root cause that conventional treatments largely ignore. This is the pathway that separates symptom management from actual disease reversal. Fenugreek's flavonoid and saponin compounds have demonstrated potent anti-inflammatory effects, specifically through inhibition of the NF-kappa B signaling pathway. NF-kappa B is essentially the master alarm system for inflammation in the body. When it's chronically activated, as it is in type 2 diabetes, it produces a cascade of inflammatory cytokines that directly damage beta cells, reduce their insulin-producing capacity, and accelerate their death. Think of NF-kappa B as a fire alarm that's been stuck in the on position for years. The alarm itself is causing damage at this point. The constant inflammatory signaling is destroying the very cells the body needs to regulate blood sugar. The noise from the alarm is so loud that the repair crews can't communicate. The workers on the factory floor can't hear instructions. Everything breaks down. Fenugreek compounds help reset that alarm. They don't eliminate the immune system's ability to respond to real threats. They quiet the chronic false alarm that's been destroying pancreatic tissue for months or years. A study conducted at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi examined the effects of fenugreek seed extract on inflammatory biomarkers in 114 participants over 12 weeks, measuring C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 levels, two key markers of systemic inflammation. The results showed a statistically significant 32% reduction in CRP levels and a 26% reduction in IL-6 levels in the fenugreek group compared to placebo, measured through high-sensitivity laboratory assays. This is not theoretical. This is measured. This is documented. And this is the mechanism that most people, including most physicians, have never heard discussed in the context of type 2 diabetes management. The inflammation comes down, the beta cells get breathing room, the factory starts running again. A fifth study worth mentioning, conducted at the Indian Council of Medical Research, examined the molecular action of fenugreek compounds on diabetic tissue specifically, analyzing how trigonelline and diostronin interact with mitochondrial function in insulin-resistant cells. The findings demonstrated enhanced mitochondrial efficiency and improved oxidative stress markers in treated tissue, suggesting that fenugreek doesn't just address surface-level glucose numbers, but actually restores cellular energy production at the deepest metabolic level. When mitochondria function better, cells produce energy more efficiently, insulin sensitivity improves, and the entire metabolic cascade begins to normalize from the inside out. Here is the exact morning protocol based on what the clinical research supports. Take 10 grams of whole fenugreek seeds, which is approximately 1 heaping tablespoon. Soak them overnight in a small glass of room temperature water for at least 8 hours. In the morning, drain the water and consume the soaked seeds directly on an empty stomach, at least 30 minutes before eating breakfast. The soaking is non-negotiable. It breaks down the hard outer seed coat that would otherwise reduce bioavailability of the active compounds by up to 60%. Consuming dry, unsoaked seeds delivers a fraction of the therapeutic benefit documented in clinical trials. This single preparation step is the difference between a protocol that works and one that disappoints. The timing matters. Consuming fenugreek on an empty stomach ensures maximum absorption of 4-hydroxyisoleucine and allows the galactomannan fiber matrix to form in the stomach before any food arrives, creating the glucose metering effect before it's needed. If fenugreek is consumed alongside a large meal, the galactomannan binds to food particles instead of forming the gel barrier in the intestinal lining, and the glucose slowing effect is reduced by roughly half. For those who find the taste difficult, and fenugreek does have a bitter maple-like flavor that takes getting used to, the soaked seeds can be blended into a small smoothie with plain water and a 1/4 cup of plain yogurt. The yogurt does not interfere with absorption, and the fermentation cultures may actually enhance bioavailability of certain saponin compounds. Some people also add a small amount of raw honey, though keeping added sugars minimal is advisable when the goal is blood sugar regulation. From clinical practice, here are 5 things that make the difference between partial results and transformative ones. First, consistency matters more than dose escalation. 10 grams daily for 90 consecutive days produces dramatically better results than 20 grams taken sporadically. The metabolic pathways being activated require sustained signaling to produce measurable changes in insulin sensitivity. 1 week on and 3 days off is not a protocol. It's a waste of seeds. Second, never boil or heat fenugreek seeds before consuming them. High heat degrades 4-hydroxyisoleucine and reduces galactomannan viscosity. Room temperature soaking preserves all active compounds. Some traditional preparations involve dry roasting fenugreek seeds for flavor, and while that's fine for culinary use, it destroys the therapeutic compounds that make this protocol effective. Third, black pepper enhances absorption of diosgenin by up to 40% through piperine-mediated bioavailability enhancement. A quarter teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper consumed alongside the soaked seeds significantly amplifies the AMPK activation pathway. This is one of those clinical details that separates people who get moderate results from people who get exceptional results. Fourth, avoid consuming fenugreek within 2 hours of any diabetes medication. The combined glucose-lowering effect can potentially cause hypoglycemia in medicated individuals. This is not because fenugreek is dangerous, it's because it's effective. Work with a physician to monitor levels and potentially adjust medication dosages as improvements occur. The goal is partnership with medical care, not replacement of it. Fifth, track fasting blood glucose daily using a home glucometer starting from day 1. The research shows initial measurable reductions typically appear between days 14 and 21, with continued progressive improvement through weeks 6 to 12. Having objective data prevents discouragement during the initial adaptation period, when subjective feelings may not yet reflect internal metabolic changes. The numbers will move before the feelings do. Trust the data. The 4 mistakes that cancel the benefits entirely. Using fenugreek powder from a jar instead of whole seeds, where oxidation has degraded active compounds by the time it reaches the kitchen. Skipping the overnight soak and just chewing dry seeds in the morning. Taking it with a large meal instead of on an empty stomach. And inconsistent use, taking it for a week, stopping for 3 days, and expecting results. Each of these mistakes has been observed repeatedly in clinical settings. And each one explains why some people report no benefit, while others experience dramatic improvement from the exact same seed. Let's lock in everything covered today. Type 2 diabetes is not simply a blood sugar problem. It is a pancreatic inflammation disease driven by NF-kappa B pathway activation, visceral fat infiltration, and progressive beta cell destruction. Conventional approaches manage the symptom, elevated glucose, without addressing these root mechanisms. They silence the alarm without putting out the fire. Fenugreek seeds target all 4 critical pathways simultaneously. 4-hydroxyisoleucine provides glucose-responsive insulin sensitization without beta cell burnout. Galactomannan fiber meters glucose absorption, preventing destructive blood sugar spikes. Diosgenin activates AMPK, the same master metabolic switch targeted by metformin, enabling insulin-independent glucose uptake. And flavonoid compounds inhibit NF-kappa B, quieting the chronic inflammatory cascade that destroys pancreatic function. No single pharmaceutical on the market addresses all 4 of these pathways simultaneously. This seed does. The protocol is 10 grams of whole seeds soaked overnight, consumed on an empty stomach every morning, with black pepper for enhanced absorption, and consistent daily use for a minimum of 12 weeks. Here's what needs to be understood clearly. Aging is not a sentence. Type 2 diabetes is not a life sentence. The body possesses remarkable regenerative capacity when it receives the right molecular signals. These pathways exist in every person watching this right now. They're built into human biology. They're waiting for activation. And that activation can begin tomorrow morning with a single tablespoon of seeds that costs less than a cup of coffee. The body that exists 12 months from now is being built by the decisions made consistently, starting today. Not by a single dramatic intervention, not by the latest pharmaceutical, by the quiet, daily, compounding effect of giving cells what they need to repair, regenerate, and restore function. Every morning is a new instruction sent to every cell in the body. The question is simply what that instruction says. Quick favor, check right now